Good evening. Welcome to Connect the Six, a bi-weekly segment in which Keep Six highlights key issues within our community. In addition to highlighting the types of people we continuously advocate for, Keep Six invites professionals that are capable of exploring the issues we aim to address. My guest this week is activist Giovanni Hosang, who will be sharing with us the importance of community for Black people, particularly Black immigrants who make up nearly half of Toronto. And to be honest, we're beginning to see it across Canada. And with Giovanni here, who was settled on the West Coast. The West Coast, right? The West Coast. We'll get more into how that goes. So, Giovanni Hosang is a graduate of Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, originally from Spanish Town, Jamaica. After transferring to Simon Fraser University, he became involved in a number of groups, initiatives, and activities. During this time, he was the president of FSU Students of Caribbean and African Ancestry, then the president of the Student Union at SFU as well, and he sees himself as someone who unites the people. The purpose of his work is to bring together people by using technology and social mobilization to help make a difference in our society. In his view, many issues that divide us as a society has to do with semantics, the semantic roots. And if we focus on the bigger picture, we'll achieve the social change. That's what that's the... Currently, Giovanni is working as an engineer in Seattle and volunteering for several organizations that support the community. Hi, Gio. Welcome. It's nice seeing you. It's been a minute, and I appreciate the fact that you're here and took the time out to come in here and have this conversation with us. So now that I've kind of introduced a little bit about you, can you just tell us some more?
Greetings. Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. I'm here calling in from the Wamish territories, known here as Seattle. I just wanted to acknowledge that we're on the stolen territories, and our work that we do as Black community organizers is directly intertwined with Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous struggles. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and make sure, as we talk about space, and that will come up a lot here, I just want to talk about that. But thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. Big ups, Arden. You don't know. I was a mascot. Arden is our high school, and I was just really, really happy seeing a lot of Black Jamaican immigrants come here and flourish in North America. So yeah, I'm here. I'm chilling. Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're going to focus more on social, the social work and social aspects, right? So on what type of social problems have you ever worked on? Why do you think these social problems that we're facing in society, why do you think they're important?
I guess I can jump into the fact that why I got so passionate in the first place about this stuff. And I came to Canada, or I went to Canada, I'm in Seattle now, but I went to Canada in 2015 after doing a year at university in Jamaica, and transferred to SFU. And it was a situation where, trying a new place, trying to bring my whole positive self and all that. But I just recognized quickly that, people are very polite, but there's a lot of biases and prejudice that people have. We have this weird thing where you're hyper visible because you're Black, but also invisible. And it was just very weird because in Toronto, you have a more, a Black community, whereas in Vancouver, it's more dispersed. And it was a very challenging experience. So, got involved with the Black student group on my campus, Students of Caribbean and African Ancestry. And that's where I recognized that there was a lot of unnecessary pushback for some unnecessary things. And I started to get deeper and deeper into trying to get deeper at systemic issues because, I don't know, sometimes, while we're in Jamaica at the time, I was a bit more individualistic. It's like, oh yeah, man, just, you know as a run, you hustle, you struggle and you get, where you want at the end. But here, I recognize that there's a lot of bigger forces at play. So our Black student group was being evicted by our student union, and we came together and we said, no, we're not gonna have that. So come on, write a petition, and, advocate for ourselves. And that made me go deeper into other issues like, okay, why are we being exploited as international students? I was international at the time. A lot of international students were paying higher fees, and I looked into the history and all that. And that's where I got involved in overall student advocacy, and with a byproduct of that is also connecting with other communities and other groups like student workers as a whole, and paying attention to bigger issues. So that's really why I think it's so important. I think I really got involved through solidarity, and I recognize that there's a lot of stuff that if we want, we should speak out and bring in people.
Yeah. So basically, your main, I want to say the main thing that you were advocating for back in Vancouver, is it right? Was the fact that international students and immigrants were being a lot more not targeted, but for instance, it's the same here in Toronto. Me going to school, they were charging higher fees too, right? So that's the thing you're saying. So why do you think that there's a constant pressure for international students or immigrants like ourselves, the Black people, the constant pressure for that?
I think there's a hidden truth in Canadian society where they try to make Black people not speak up. They try to put this whole POC things people of color, immigrants come, we all love you, multicultural, but your recognition of the roots of Canadian society of being displacing Black folks from different decades or colonizing indigenous land is something that can't be hidden, and a lot of people are reclaiming that story. And I think that is now showing a lot more, even in our spaces on university campuses. And for the specific question around tuition and underfunding, I think it's just a very deliberate effort on the government. If you look at the history of how underfunding took place, it specifically said, more international people coming, let us offload the funding that we usually do for post-secondary education and take money from them instead. So while domestic students get subsidized, international students don't. So it's a really discriminatory policy, where it was a specific cuts in 1992 by the federal government at the time, caused fund transfers for education to really decline, and you saw the uptick in the tuition fees for international students, whereas the funding from the government went down. So it's just a priorities issue, and immigrants, Black immigrants, Black student immigrants are not really prioritized under these budgets and all of them fancy stuff that these governments do. So we're the byproduct of that.
That's interesting that you said that, because I didn't know that it went so far back. But how would you say you've gotten, you talked about becoming the president and joining different initiatives. How else have you kind of found a way to advocate for that?
I think it's mostly through art. So in the latter part of my years at school, I started to get involved with the Teachers and Support Student Union. I wasn't a TA, but I started to learn a lot more about labor issues and structural advocacy in unions, labor unions, and all that type of stuff. And I find that was another struggle or another avenue that I recognized I could have put my voice to. So we helped unionize research assistants. Well, since 2019 to now, we won the first unionization campaign at the TSSC, and I have to big them up all the time. So much love for Jade and Vince. Big ups if y'all seen this. But unionized research assistants, because that if you organize, if you come together, you recognize that you can actually make much more change than if you were doing it and advocating for yourself only. So those initiatives and advocacy are very helpful to any kind of changes that you want. And I think outside of just the student movement, you also have the labor movement, which is intertwined. Same with the climate movement, and I think that that's something that I try to do, just amplify a lot of different groups, because I'm not in all of them, and everybody needs everybody to flourish.
Yeah, makes sense. So you talk a lot about like union and coming together, which basically is a community, right? So if we're going more into what the main topic is like why we as Black people and immigrants need community. So since we're discussing community, why do you believe it's necessary that that community is so important to us, you know?
Yeah, I think space is very important, and community space and creating space is so vital. Getting involved with SOCA, we had a 250 square foot room. 250, yeah, about that. And every Friday we'd be meeting, every two weeks on a Friday we'd be meeting 10, 15, 20 people in a cramped up room, sitting with a couch and all that. And it became such a space. Some people come and sleep in it if they can't go home that night, or just like using it as a connection point, a touch point. On campus, you come, you go into that room and you leave. You know that that's the Black spot on campus. And that really helped isolate us from a lot of the issues that were going on campus, and create a community for us, by us, because it was a situation where in classes you hear people use up the N-word, you hear people doing, just very reactionary, mainstream, oh, I don't understand this Black Lives Matter thing, or they don't really get the whole idea of like Black racial equity specifically. People understand, oh, I'm not racist, but they can't talk about Blackness, uncomfortable saying the word Black. And it's like, it was just such a eye-opening experience for me. It's like, people are racist, but they're polite. So they were nice to you individually, but then when it comes to like Black issues on the TV or anything, you just hear them say, oh, that person deserves to get shot because they resisted or stuff like that. And I'm like, yo, what kind of spaces are these? So like, I had a choice. It's either I take away my Blackness and fit in, or I withdraw myself from certain spaces when I need to and go into these Black spaces and build community. So like, I really had such an amazing experience with SOCA. That's what we call it, SOCA, Play and Work, Students of Caribbean and African Ancestry, SOCA music, wink wink. That created a space of connectedness to every other Black person on campus. Like, as soon as I saw one, they were like, yo, well, go on, use my accent to my benefit. So, yo, yeah, but SOCA, XYZ, and, bringing people that way. And now, I looked last week, they had an event, and they're now in a bigger building. We were being evicted from the small little 240 square feet thing. And we fought a battle, I can talk more about that later, over a 2-year period, and now in a bigger space, and 130 people come to a normal community gathering, and people are shocked. So it's just like, it shows you how much spaces and community connectedness is important, because it will flourish. Before you know it, people are looking towards it as like, wow, I can't believe that this is happening. So it's a beautiful experience. I love it.
Yeah, and it's crazy because you mentioned the whole having to decide if you have to take away your Blackness and you kind of like assimilate into basically the Canadian culture, and like them I feel like it's very sensitive, but I feel like Canadian society for the most part, they say there's not much racism. I feel like it's very subtle, and because it's so subtle, they don't have a lot of like conversations surrounding it. And so what would you say is like how would you want them to educate them on that? Because you said like you've been in spaces and they're talking about how like this should have happened to this individual, specifically like the shootings and stuff. Like, what would you say is the best way to educate people in spaces like that?
I think us being very loud about our issues make them can't ignore it. And I think it's the fact and I guess reality of it. When we create space and visible and show where Blackness full and full, people can't ignore all of the aspects that we talk about. So, for example, we talk about the type of racism in America, quote unquote, N-word, shouting and all that stuff, which happens in Canada too, by the way. But the more subtle forms of racism that exist on a day in, day out. And I think one way is just like making sure that when decision making is happening, make sure that wherever you have impact or wherever you have power, you're making policies that center Black students or Black folks. Sorry, I'm talking about students all the time. Black folks that recognize the specific ways in way these type of subtle racism exists. For example, in your new employee program, you're coming in, you are taught the history of Canada being a colonial state and also displacing so many Black people around Canada. So it can't be something that you ignore anymore because there were specific policies that were made to exclude Black people. And this whole notion of, Black people, we got racist, it's like there's a reason why Black people are not front and center in this place because you've tried to make us so invisible. So in the racial reckoning of 2020 amidst George Floyd, a lot of the stuff what we have been saying in these different spaces have come to light, have come in public sphere because people had to what is happening in Canada for real? I know a little bit of that has died down from the white institutions, but that, for example, was a real way in which a lot of people learned more and actually had to catch themselves and to see where they can make changes and make policies that are better for Black people. So
it's crazy the fact that you brought up employment, the working environment and the space for Black people, because for my thesis I did I did code switching. So basically, what code switching is, having to change your whole persona to match specifically the white environment, because that's what Canadian is, right? So I remember in doing that, I had to interview quite a few people, and a lot of them, they were like, we're not familiar with that. And I'm like, of course you're not, because for the most part, you don't have to code switch, And I remember there's this one specific example. It's not specifically code switching, but it's to show you the same dynamic where you're saying it's harder for people that look like us to get into work field, right? I was sitting at a cafe, and it happened to be one of the spots where interviews were being taken place for a job. And this guy, he was interviewing the person, and as soon as they left, I guess another probably higher up, a manager, I don't know. They came and was yeah, I don't think I'm gonna hire him because he's not from here. He's immigrant. I'm sitting there wow, and that's why I feel it's so I just feel it's so important that people that look like myself and yourself are in positions to be able to help, as well as they need to change their way of thinking, but also I genuinely feel we need more people that look like us in positions to hire up. So that's definitely another conversation we need to have. Okay, so I have another question. What are ways that you think that young people can take effective action to make change in the community? You've talked about a lot of things you've done. What are some other ways you think?
I think engage at the capacity that you have. Use up your power. If you're white, use up your white privilege and your white power, because that's what it is. It's power you have in comparison to other people. For us, also making sure that we are, standing in solidarity with other marginalized people. Just through petitions, online campaigns, going out to a rally when you can, even when the issues don't directly affect you. But try to understand where issues are coming from and why they exist. But pretty more often than not, it's you can easily tell when who has power in a situation and who are being oppressed by a particular issue, and just speak up against it. I think it's a general thing. Get involved in, one of the big things is organize your households and your family. Organize your peers, organize your neighbors. Make your parents know, make your family know what injustice is happening, and even when they don't understand, if it's a good training ground to talk about issues. And I think that's so important, because a lot of the times we go out in spaces and can comfortably speak on that, but then at our homes we cannot speak on the issues, which the best way, organize your peers, organize people close to you, and also like just amplify.
Alright, so you're now living in Seattle.
Yep, I moved in 2020 September. I'm now working as an engineer.
Out of the Canadian hemisphere, but yeah. So now that you're still in North America, so I feel like
I'm 2 hours away from Vancouver. So Seattle is actually 2 hours away from Vancouver. So I go back and forth pretty often.
Okay, makes sense. All right, so tell us, what is the difference in terms of like the social dynamics, in the States, Canada, even though we're 2 hours away, still two different countries. What are the social dynamics like? Has it changed much since moving?
Seattleites are a lot, people here are a lot like people in Vancouver. What I find different in Seattle is much bigger Black population. You can go hit up an event anytime. But Vancouver is changing though. There's a lot of like Black community events that's popping up in Jamaica, in Vancouver. But in Seattle, you see a lot more of that. A lot of Black American stuff. Whereas in Canada, when you say Black, you're talking about the fullness of African, Caribbean, Black, Canadian cultures coming together. Here, it's a little bit more of the African American events and activities, and you have to kind of seek out. Oh, you have to seek it out anywhere in the West Coast, like Jamaica and stuff, if you want. But I find that as it comes to the Black community, as it comes to people, white people, and other community, I think it's a little bit more direct. People are a little bit more willing to have conversations than in Canada. Race is a bit more understood as a social construct that US exists under, because of when you do the survey, you have to tick a box. There is these policies there. It's mainstream to talk about race in US politics, but not so much in Canada. But I think there's a little bit of evolution happening with Canada as well. So it's very interesting. I'm not too far for it to be too different, but I do see a little bit of difference.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, I don't know, I'm just going off like obviously what I've seen on like the media and stuff. So I'm not going to sit here and be like it's far worse in the US than it is here. But I definitely feel like here it's not talked about. It's not at the top. Like they don't actively talk about it. They try to pretend, I would say, because everyone has Canada as the nicest people in the world, So it's kind of like no one wants to have that conversation a lot of the times. Whereas like with the US, it's shown so much in the media that conversation has to be had at all times. So I feel like that's the difference to me, I would say. Even though it's not necessarily like on topic, I kind of want to go back to the fact that you said you were living on the stolen land, because it's definitely something that we need to talk about in Canada. It's very important. So just like a little bit of like what that's like on your side, like living there and like the
what I find on like, because my family's in Toronto, and I realize that here we speak more about indigenous land and the histories, and this is where I take a lot of my learnings from, where a lot of indigenous community organizers and student organizers have platformed the idea of making sure we acknowledge the lands that we're on, acknowledge the histories and the histories that we're even benefiting from as Black immigrants, and the fact that like a lot of these lands weren't even given up by these nations, right? In the West Coast specifically, it's non-treaty territory, meaning their colonial society just took the land without signing, without the indigenous people surrendering or giving up any of the lands that it's on. And it's just like I think that we need to make sure that we continuously, try to find common ground and solidarity of like how do we decolonize? We talked about decolonize when it came to independence. Well, how do we decolonize about issues before that? Like literal settlers came on these lands, tried to take it away, and now having a connection to it. How do we reconstitute and give back land to indigenous peoples for them to make decisions about how redistribution of resources go? Because at the end of the day, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, US, and others, I'm sure, are colonial entities that took away land from indigenous peoples and imported black enslaved people from the continent to Africa. And I think it's very important for us to note that history and not just act like indigenous people don't exist anymore. A lot of the time we can just go into that. And I think it's important to, as black folks, build that solidarity and that bridge.
Sorry. That is my next question. Because here in Toronto, I would say they talk about it fairly a lot, especially since the graveyard was 200 people, the graveyard that happened, right? I just wanted to know if it's been, because you were living there, the actual area. So is the conversation actively going on? Are people actively doing more on that side compared to here? Because I would say here we have the conversation. You've seen the posts, you've seen the orange stuff on Instagram. What is the conversation like?
So with a lot of the communities, we see a lot of movements and again, some of it is co-opted, Vancouver City Council will pass some indigenous strategic plan or stuff like that to one, give the demands or not buy into what actually accede to some of the demands of a lot of the organizers. But also you see some stuff that's pretty cool that's happening where Squamish, which is one of the territories in Vancouver, or one of the nations in Vancouver, which have a new housing development project that way that the permits were waived from the normal regulations and building housing and land for their particular community. And I think that's kind of stuff is pretty exciting because that's literally land back. I'm not sure the details of how it's going to be implemented or anything like that, but those are the type of initiatives when you see it, you can support it when you can. But yeah, I think in terms of conversations, people always having conversations, just that actions don't follow up a lot of the times. So I think communities are continuously trying to push back and build solidarity, of course, to try and push back. One of the big things is on the West Coast, a lot of the pipeline conversations are happening, right? So they said, I support indigenous communities, but then I'm pushing a pipeline through their territories. So that's the BC government is allowing a lot of these things even though NDP government is supposed to be the left of center or whatever, but doing the same things that would have been done by any other colonial government. So it's sad, but it's just the case that a lot of it is just lip service. But you just have to try and learn more as much as possible. Because it's deep historical context. And we can learn a lot from it. And also just lend voice to it when we can.
Thank you so much for that. Because I just feel even though it's not necessarily what we're here to talk about, I feel we just need to bring some awareness to it at any point that we can. But just to get back to our topic, so at Keep Six, one of our main goals is to try to route the youth to stay away from the gun violence issue that we have here in Toronto. or main tactic is using music, because as everyone knows, Black people love music. So we kind of use music as like the escape, and like we create like a community, especially through our new program, the Youth in Music program that we've actively been doing throughout the last, I'm gonna say 3 weeks, to push that agenda of, you know, keeping them off the streets. What would you say that are some other routes that, you know, if you could recommend, like what would you say you could do to recommend getting the youth out?
I'm very happy to talk about that. I used to be involved in 2016 until now. A lesser extent now, but Black Boys Code is an organization that helps bring Black youth, and they have Black Kids Code for girls as well, a new organization that just started last year, that helps bring Black boys, in the case of Black Boys Code, and Black Kids Code girls in the case of that one, to bring them into tech, introduce them to a lot of the technological advances from ages 8 to 17, to introduce technological skills, programming languages, anything regarding tech. Black Kids Code for girls is the same, but for self-identified women, who basically the same thing, to introduce more youth into tech. And I think that's a very great thing. The reason why I chose software engineering was because it was the least amount of work to get the most amount of like impact and money and resources, in my opinion. I wanted to be a pilot when I was young, and that's how I pivoted to software engineering, maybe in the future, but that's something that I found, and I think that's a good diversion mechanism. If you especially show them the resources, the skills that they're going to learn, wherever you want, you can apply it, but also like, you know, access to financial equity, access to like, you know, being in whichever technological revolution comes next. Because it's pretty fun. It's not too difficult a lot of the times. A lot of the times it's much more intimidating because it's, you know, non-Black people. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I try to make it seem more like, you know, try to close it off and not make it through it. But I think we can break into those spaces.
I definitely think that's honestly like a good thing. Can you pitch that? But is that where would you say they could find, like, get into?
They can find that chapter in Toronto. I can hook up Keep Six with the founder over there to come a conversation. But Brian Johnson started it in Vancouver. Now I believe there's 10 chapters across Canada and the US. So in Toronto, Hamilton, Vancouver, Seattle, Atlanta, and a bunch of other places that I don't remember right now. But blackboyscode.org, people can find out more information. But these are amazing resources that people can get access to. Another one for Black professionals or youth above 17 is Peoples in Technology, BPTN. I'm not remembering the full acronym. Black Tech Professionals Network, yes. And they have big conferences in Ontario and stuff. But for tech, I think that's a good mechanism. The kids are smarter than me, to be honest. Like, I'm not an academic, so they grasp things very quickly. I take a little longer, but it's an amazing thing. You should definitely check out one of their workshops.
Is it free? Like getting into that?
Yep. Free for the kids to come and just learn at the workshop. So like people who are working in tech would come and do classes. So like if you want to do like HTML 101, you'd go like 25 kids in a room, or back in COVID online, and then 4 mentors and the instructor. So it's like a lot of people who work in tech or are in tech coming back to give back to community through teaching them a lot of the tech skills, building a website. One of them was building a robot. Like, there's this thing, You can create a maze and make the robot go around the maze and stuff like that. So it's, pretty exciting, fun stuff that you can do to learn coding and a lot of the skills that, technologists use. That isn't true, because
I'm glad I asked that question, just because, we're always trying to get kids, youth off the streets and, anything to get them get them working. For instance, we always have a back to school drive. So even with this, because a lot of the times I feel like they have so much, they know a lot, they're educated, but they don't have the resources and the access to these things. So I feel like this is definitely something we can look into to kind of see Keep Six can link up with, But thank you so much. That is all the time we have on Connect the Six. It was a pleasure having you on and hearing what you had to say. Make sure to check out Giovanni's social media, which will be linked below, just to keep up with his activism or just to get to know him a little bit more. Keep a lookout for our next Instagram post to see what we will be discussing on the next segment of Connect the Six. Once again, thank you, Gio, and